I returned home for the reunion dinner and casually asked my sister, was the Q4 proposal review still scheduled for Friday? She looked at me, paused, then said with a half smile, your projects are canceled. My fork touched the plate. I finished the bite I was chewing. Across the table, my uncle glanced down at his napkin. My mother stirred her iced tea like she hadn't heard. My brother-in-law kept eating like the food suddenly demanded all of his attention. I didn't ask again. I didn't flinch. I just reached for more rice. It was the first time in 2 years all of us had sat around the same table. The reunion dinner, as Mom insisted on calling it, had become more of a quarterly check-in since the family business started picking up. When I moved back from Chicago 5 years ago, the company was days from folding. Dad had just passed, the board was fractured, and my sister Meredith had already relocated to Singapore. I was the only one left standing who knew the back-end systems, the local vendors, the staff. So I stepped in, no salary, no title. Just me, spreadsheets, and an office chair with one broken wheel. The project Meredith just canceled had been my baby, a social impact branch. Local artisans, fair trade certification, community reinvestment, idealistic on the surface, maybe, but the numbers had proven otherwise. It wasn't just a passion project, it was profitable. We tripled regional engagement, opened 5 new partnerships, and had just secured a federal sustainability grant. But I hadn't seen the grant paperwork. Meredith had volunteered to help submit. That was 2 months ago. Then came the access issues folders mysteriously relocked, files renamed, even my Slack permissions quietly adjusted. I brushed it off. Too much work, I told myself. Glitches. Oversight. Now I knew better. I took another bite, chewed slowly. Let the salt settle on my tongue. I wasn't surprised. That was the worst part. Disappointed, yes, but not surprised. Somewhere inside I had known. When Meredith returned 6 months ago, she didn't come back to collaborate. She came back to reclaim. You've done well holding the fort, she said once, during one of those overly polite catch-up coffees. But you've always been more execution than vision. I remember nodding like that was a compliment. Now, she was sitting across from me, her statement delivered, her wineglass poised, waiting for a reaction. I gave her none. Not then. Let the silence wrap itself around the table. Let the others squirm. The chicken was dry, as usual. Mom always overcooked it, said it was safer. I kept eating, kept my expression unreadable. I could feel them watching, wondering if I'd cry, shout, demand an explanation. But I just looked at the gravy dish and reached for it. Calmly. Deliberately. Like nothing had shifted. Like something hadn't just been stolen from me in front of an entire room of people who used to call me the glue. After dinner, Meredith offered to make tea. I declined. Said I had an early meeting. There was no meeting. Just a quiet apartment and a long night ahead with documents to gather. I walked out without saying goodbye. Outside, the air was sharp. October in Portland always smells like rain and cedar. I stood by my car, hands on the roof, breathing. 1, 2, 3. I counted backwards. A trick from therapy. Reorient. Ground. I got in, turned the key, and let the engine hum for a full minute before pulling away. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove. Past the bakery I used to stop by on my way to the office. Past the co-op where we hosted our first pop-up market. Past the community center, still painted in our brand colors, the mural project I pushed through when Meredith called it off-brand. The city didn't know my name. The team didn't see my face on press releases. But the work had been mine. Quiet, steady, real. By the time I reached home, the email was already in my inbox. Effective immediately, the Community Growth Initiative will be dissolved. No signature. No explanation. Just a forwarded notice from the board. Time stamped 6:42 p.m., the exact moment I was spooning mashed potatoes next to someone who had smiled while cutting me out. I poured a glass of water. Saturday at the kitchen table. Opened a new spreadsheet, labeled it Transfers and Ownership Timeline. It was time to start writing things down. Dates, names, file versions. Not to weaponize, at least not yet. But to remind myself I wasn't crazy. That the work had happened. That I had built something. And that someone had decided I didn't deserve to be credited for it. They thought they'd buried me with that dinner. What they didn't realize was I had been documenting the soil. The next morning, I opened the old project drive. It was still there under a different folder name, Moved to an internal subdirectory marked Legacy Inactive. I clicked through supplier contracts, vendor correspondence, early prototypes, grant drafts. My fingerprints were everywhere. Even the original pitch deck had my initials in the metadata. Meredith hadn't bothered to erase those. Maybe she didn't think I'd look. Or maybe she thought I wouldn't care anymore. But she didn't understand. This wasn't just work. This was the only thing that had made staying worth it. 5 years ago, the company was hanging on by a thread. Our father's sudden passing had left a vacuum. No clear succession, no plan, just a bloated budget and a shrinking client base. Meredith had already built a career abroad, sleek and sharp, doing brand partnerships for luxury firms. I was the one who stayed behind. Just for a while, I told myself, until things stabilize. I took unpaid leave from my job in Chicago, moved back into the apartment above Mom's garage, and walked into a crumbling office with flickering lights and unpaid invoices stacked in a drawer labeled "Handle Later." The staff barely remembered my name. Most of them thought I was an intern. I didn't correct them. I stayed late, skipped lunch, patched holes. I learned the supply chain backward. I fixed the client retention numbers, rebuilt the budget model, and presented a recovery plan in week 6 that even the board adopted word for word. The Community Growth Initiative was born out of that desperation. It started small, partnering with local weavers to produce a limited artisan line. The margins were thin, but the story was strong. Soon, the press picked it up. Then the grants came. Then the pilot turned into a division. I still remember the first product tag we printed. Built with care, rooted in community. I'd written that on a napkin during a rain delay. Meredith called it quaint. Now it was part of our brand voice manual. I hadn't taken a vacation in 3 years. Didn't even upgrade my car. Every spare dollar went into stabilizing the team, paying bonuses when the board refused, or covering mistakes Meredith's consultants made during her flashy rebranding project last winter. But I didn't mind. I told myself the family would see it, that the work would speak for itself, that being reliable counted for something. I was wrong. 2 months ago, Meredith invited me to a strategy sync at a downtown hotel. She ordered something complicated with oat milk and cinnamon syrup. I just got plain coffee. "You're doing good work," she said, smoothing her napkin. "But the market's shifting. We need to pivot." That was her way of saying she wanted my division without the friction of me attached. I didn't realize it then. I thought she was offering help. She smiled and said, "I'm just streamlining operations. Nothing will change." That week, my team lead was reassigned. The following week, my calendar access glitched. Then the shared documents disappeared. And still I said nothing. I kept working. I kept hoping. Because that's what you do in families. You hope they won't hurt you more than they have to. I closed the project drive and opened a new window. The last paycheck I'd taken was 18 months ago. Before that, I'd deferred salary to fund a hiring sprint. My personal savings account showed exactly $4,126.87. Rent was due next week. I exhaled, logged into the old HR portal, and downloaded copies of every unpaid invoice I had submitted. 42 in total. Some marked approved pending disbursement. Others, under review. Meredith had signed off on at least half. I gathered them into a folder and backed everything up twice. Once on a hard drive. Once in a cloud directory under a name only I knew. It was nearly noon when my phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "Can you swing by tonight? Meredith wants to talk. Don't make this bigger than it is." I didn't reply. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. That afternoon I went for a walk. I passed the mural we'd commissioned last year, young hands holding old tools painted across the wall of the factory's west side. Kids used to take photos in front of it. Now, the colors had started to fade. No one had done upkeep. No one had noticed. I sat on the curb and scrolled through old photos. Launch day, smiling staff, community leaders holding ribbon scissors. My name wasn't in any of the captions, but I remembered every face. I knew who stayed late, who cried when the grant cleared, who brought their mom to see the first production line. That evening, I cooked rice and lentils, ate in silence, reviewed 2 job boards, saved 3 postings. None of them paid much, but they were clean starts. New soil. At 9:03 p.m., another message came in. From Meredith. "You're still part of the family. Just Not this part of the business. Hope you understand. I put the phone face down. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I opened a new document. At the top, I typed a title, Everything I Built. Then I began listing. Not for them, for me. So I wouldn't forget that even if they erased my name, the roots still remembered who watered them first. 2 nights later, I couldn't sleep. The hallway light flickered outside my apartment, casting that same uneven shadow across the kitchen wall like it always did. But something felt different, restless. I got up, opened my laptop again, and stared at the list I'd started. Everything I built. 47 entries. Projects, budgets, vendor relationships, partnerships, taglines, even internal memos that became company policy. I had receipts, literal ones. I clicked open a folder named Early Drafts. Inside, grant proposals in my voice, feedback loops with staff in the Philippines and Tacoma, timestamp screenshots. There it was proof not just of my work, but of my voice. Meredith could take the title, the press, even the office, but she couldn't rewrite that. Until I opened the email. It was buried under promotional spam and a subscription renewal. Subject line, forwarded FYI. No greeting, just a thread of internal communications I hadn't been meant to see. A junior analyst on Meredith's team had accidentally CC'd me instead of someone with a similar name. The thread was dated 3 weeks back. It referenced a total transition of community ops under MD. Oversight. MD being Meredith, of course. Further down, one line made my stomach turn. We've archived all legacy author tags, redacted PDF trails per directive. Redacted. They weren't just pushing me out. They were erasing me. Every attachment I opened showed edits my name struck out, replaced by Team Lead, or Director Strategic Growth. Neutral, anonymous, and thoroughly not me. One document had the gall to list Meredith as the founding visionary. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Not because I was surprised, because the violation was so quiet, so clinical. I closed the laptop slowly, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water. My hands shook not from rage, but recognition. I'd seen this before, in smaller ways. When Mom forgot to mention I stayed late every night during Dad's illness. When Meredith called from Singapore to ask how the little business was going, after I'd just saved it from a tax audit, when the staff started bypassing me to report directly to her, even though she hadn't learned the names of half of them. They had always seen me as transitional, necessary but temporary. Meredith was legacy. I was scaffolding. I sat back down and opened a second folder. Finance and contributions. For the first time, I let myself go there. I pulled up old bank statements. I traced every unpaid salary cycle, every time I covered a vendor's invoice from my own checking account. Rent for a team member who lost their housing. Office supplies when procurement was frozen. I tallied it slowly, methodically. Over $58,000 across 5 years, not as a donor, as the one holding the bleeding edge, while everyone else posed for ribbon cuttings. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft, of time, of labor, of credit. And it didn't stop there. 2 days later, I got a call from Ruby, our former grant coordinator who had since moved to Oregon Health. She sounded tense. "Hey, did you know your name's been removed from the grant attribution file?" I froze. "I only noticed because one of our auditors flagged a mismatch," she continued. "It lists M. Dawson as both author and lead contact. But the application history was clearly yours. I remember editing it with you." I thanked her, hung up, and checked the grant platform. Sure enough, the author ID had been changed. A note at the bottom said, "Updated for consistency." Consistency with what? A version of history where I never existed? I called the grant administrator directly, posed as someone doing a compliance check. She confirmed the edit had been requested internally by Meredith's office. No consent from me required. "It's common for execs to streamline authorship," she said, not unkindly. "But if you have concerns, I can escalate." I didn't answer. My mind had already leapt forward. What else had they touched? That night, I printed everything. Not for drama, for documentation. I placed each item in a labeled folder. I made copies. One stayed in my apartment. One went to a safe deposit box I hadn't used since college. I called Ethan, an old friend turned attorney, who I'd once helped write his bar application when he thought about quitting law altogether. "I need to talk," I said. He didn't ask why, just said, Tomorrow, noon. By morning, I had a binder, organized, dated, cross-referenced. Every instance where my work had been claimed, revised, or erased. Emails, contracts, Slack logs, meeting minutes, even sticky notes I had photographed before Meredith's team cleaned out our shared war room. It wasn't just about the money now, or the title. It was about dignity and control. They hadn't just pushed me aside. They had rewritten the map and placed me outside the borders, like I had never been here at all. But I was. I had been. And now there would be record of that, whether they liked it or not. Ethan met me at a quiet cafe tucked behind a bookstore neutral ground, his idea. He wore a gray hoodie under a blazer, that familiar mix of casual and unshakable that used to make professors underestimate him. Not anymore. He nodded as I slid the binder across the table. "How bad is it?" he asked. "You tell me," I said. He opened it, flipped through the first section: invoice logs, project drafts, board memos. He stopped at the screenshots of the grant attribution, then looked up. "They redacted your authorship?" I nodded, and used it for a second grant under Meredith's name. His fingers tapped once on the table, slow and deliberate. "That's not just unethical. That's paper trail fraud." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. It was all there. The hours, the edits, the system changes, each move documented, like a silent heist carried out in broad daylight. "You have enough to make this loud," he said. "But I need to know, do you want loud or do you want free?" I stared at the steam curling from my coffee cup. "I want out, but not quietly." He leaned back. "Then we hit them where it hurts, not with press, with leverage." That afternoon, he drafted a formal notice of withdrawal from all joint intellectual property and internal initiatives. It wasn't just a resignation. It was a disavowal worded with surgical clarity. I wasn't walking away from the work. I was naming what was mine and publicly severing their right to claim it. By sunset, it was in the inbox of every board member. I didn't wait for replies. I logged into my work email, set an auto response that read, "This account is no longer active," and closed the tab for good. I spent that evening repotting my plants. Something small, something living. I didn't play music. I just listened to the silence, the kind that follows finality. Around 11 p.m., the text began. First from Meredith. I saw the notice. "Let's talk. You're overreacting." I didn't answer. Then Mom. "This is family. You can't just burn bridges over business." No reply. Then a voicemail from my uncle. "You should have come to the table. We could have worked this out like adults." The next morning, Ethan called. "They lawyered up. I expected that." "Are they trying to counterclaim?" I asked. "Number they're trying to negotiate." "Which means they're scared." I said nothing. Just let the truth land where it needed to. I hadn't threatened a lawsuit. I hadn't gone to the press. All I'd done was shine a light, and already the walls were cracking. 3 days later, I got a letter from the board's legal team. It was thinly veiled diplomacy, a proposal to restructure credit and legacy records to more accurately reflect contributions, contingent on me retracting my notice and signing a new NDA. I laughed, not loud. Just once, hollow and short, like air through a cracked pipe. I emailed back, declined. But I'll accept a corrected public record and a written apology filed with the grant administration. I knew they wouldn't agree. That wasn't the point. The point was that I wasn't asking anymore. That weekend, Ruby sent me a screenshot from the grant platform. My name was back on the author line. No announcement, no email, just quietly restored like nothing had happened. I stared at it for a long time. Not out of triumph, but because for the first time in months, something in the world aligned with the truth I'd been carrying alone. The company's site still had Meredith listed as founder of the initiative. But the back end, where grants lived, where contracts mattered, now bore my name. That was enough. For now. On Monday, I returned the keys to the apartment above Mom's garage. Left them in an envelope taped to the door. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't write a note. They knew why. By Wednesday, I'd secured a short-term lease in a part of town where no one knew my last name. A converted duplex with old floors and wide windows. No office, no legacy, just space. I unpacked slow. One box at a time. Labeled things. Set up my desk by the window. Lit a candle not for peace, not for closure, just for breath. Meredith sent one final message the following Friday. You got what you wanted. Congratulations. Hope it was worth it. I didn't reply, but I did forward it to Ethan. Keep for record, I wrote, tone included. That night I walked past the mural again. Someone had tagged over the lower corner with blue spray paint. Just a single word. Ours. I stood in front of it for a while, hands in my coat pockets, wind pressing my coat against my ribs. I didn't feel anger or pride, just certainty. Let them paint over it. Let them pretend. The wall would remember. The work would outlive the credits. And I was already somewhere they couldn't erase. It started slowly. The first signal came from a junior staffer who used to report to me, Nina. She sent a message to my personal email with no subject line. They've reassigned half the team, she wrote. The new directives don't make sense. Vendors are backing out. Everyone's confused. I thanked her but didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. The pattern was familiar. Cut the root, and everything above ground eventually withers. By the end of the week, I got a second message. This one from Paul, the head of our logistics partner in Denver. Can I still contact you about fulfillment issues? No one seems to know who's in charge of the community product line. I told him kindly that I was no longer involved and wished him luck. His reply came an hour later. That's a shame, you were the only reason we stayed. I didn't feel vindicated, just tired. Like watching a glass slowly tip off the edge of a table you warned everyone about, and finally hearing it shatter. The next call was from Mom. Sunday afternoon, just after 3, I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was thin, clipped at the ends, as if she'd rehearsed it. Your sister's doing her best. We all are. But some things are slipping. You know the system's better than anyone. If there's anything you could do... I listened once, then deleted it. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what had been done, just a quiet reaching like a hand extended across a canyon that they helped dig. The board issued a press release the following Tuesday. It was short, stiff, and heavy with passive voice. Due to unforeseen challenges in supply and coordination, the Community Growth Initiative will be temporarily paused pending internal review. No mention of Meredith. No mention of staff loss, vendor exits, or funding suspension. Just the word paused, as if a program could be put on ice without killing the trust that made it work. Nina emailed again, this time attaching a photo. It was a snapshot of the warehouse rows of unsold product stacked high, tagged with clearance stickers. They don't understand the inventory cycles, she wrote. They're rushing launches and canceling reorders. Clients are pulling out. It's unraveling fast. I stared at the photo, the fluorescent lights reflecting off plastic wrap, and remembered standing in that same space 2 years ago, checking barcodes at midnight, trying to make sure every item matched the system. Not for glory, just so the project wouldn't collapse, just so something would last. The text from Meredith started soon after. At first, short. We need to talk. Then longer. This isn't working. Can we meet? Then sharp. You made your point. Now what? I didn't reply. Each message came like a flare from a sinking ship that had ignored every warning, every weather report, every lighthouse. On Friday night, someone knocked on my door. I didn't answer. I watched through the peephole as Meredith stood there, coat tight around her frame, phone in hand. She didn't knock again, just stood for a while, then turned and walked away. I waited 15 minutes before I moved. Saturday back down, opened my laptop, kept working on a new project. Small, local, funded independently. A pilot program with a local nonprofit to bring trade workshops into underfunded schools. Nothing flashy, no press, just impact. I drafted the proposal that morning and already had 2 meetings lined up. Later that night, a message popped up from Ruby. The new grant was denied. Their application got flagged for inconsistencies. Did you say anything? I hadn't. I didn't need to. The moment I walked away, their scaffolding collapsed. Not because I cursed it, but because they never learned to build. The next day, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was Mom's tent is tentin and tentin and tentin. Inside was a single page. Meredith is trying. She didn't mean to shut you out. She was under pressure. Maybe you were too harsh. There was no signature, just that passive, pleading tone. The kind that asks for peace without offering repair. I folded the letter once, set it aside. I didn't tear it. I didn't respond. Because this was the part no one teaches you: the silence after truth. The quiet, the space, the long, still air after you stop being useful and start being remembered. And still, I moved forward. The new program got early traction. A small school in the east side invited me to run a workshop. I brought materials myself. Saturday with 6 students at a rickety table and watched them design their first product tags. One of them wrote, "Made with intention." I smiled, nodded, and said nothing. They didn't know the history. They didn't need to, because something new was taking root, quietly, steadily, beyond the noise of family names and erased records. And that was enough. For now, the invitation came tucked between a stack of local flyers, hand-addressed, my name in careful script across a cream envelope. Inside was a folded card printed with gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to the Dawson Family Foundation's annual dinner and awards ceremony. No mention of Meredith, just a logo, a seal, a date." I stared at it for a full minute, then slid it into the drawer beside my desk without comment. I already knew what it was: a performance disguised as an olive branch. A chance for them to rewrite the ending while pretending nothing in the middle had burned. 3 days later, Mom called again. "It would mean a lot to your sister if you came," she said, voice soft. "She's changed." I didn't answer. She continued, "She's naming the community program after Dad. It's symbolic. She thought you might want to be there for that." My silence hung. She added quieter, "It's not too late to come back." But it was. It had been late the moment they told me I wasn't needed, and then used everything I built to prop up a story I wasn't allowed to appear in. I didn't argue. I just said, "I'm booked that night," and hung up gently. The night of the event, I went to the school again. The one with the cracked windows and the flickering hallway light. We were launching our second workshop cycle this time, with 10 students. Someone had donated fabric rolls. Another had offered free screen printing access. It was messy, hopeful, real. I brought pizza. We stayed late, laughed a little too loud. No photographers. No hashtags. Just kids making things with their hands. Like creation was a kind of freedom they hadn't been allowed before. When I got home that night, there was a voicemail, Meredith's voice. "You weren't there," she said, flat but clipped. "I gave a speech. They asked where you were." I didn't know what to say. I didn't play the rest. I deleted it mid-sentence. The following week, the fallout began in earnest. The foundation's largest partner pulled funding, citing inconsistencies in record-keeping and leadership. Then came the resignation of 2 board members, quietly but not subtly. Then, finally, a statement from the board itself. The Community Growth Initiative would be formally dissolved by end of quarter. Meredith's name no longer appeared on the leadership page. No press release, no announcement, just a quiet wipe of the slate, like it had all been a temporary dream no one could quite explain. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat. I planted herbs in small ceramic pots on my windowsill. Basil, rosemary, mint. I liked the way they took up space without asking for attention. The way they grew toward light without permission. A month later, I ran into Emily, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She pulled me aside in a bookstore and said, "You know, I always wondered how you did it. Stayed so quiet, even when they erased you." I shrugged. She lowered her voice. "They're saying you were never part of the original idea anyway." I smiled, tired, a little crooked. "Funny," I said. "That's what they always say when the idea outgrows them." She said nothing, just nodded and drifted away. Later that night, I opened my drawer and pulled out the invitation again. Ran a finger over the edge. Still smooth, untouched. I tore it once, cleaned down the center, and dropped the pieces into the recycling bin. No anger, no theater, just choice. Then I sat at my desk, opened a new file, and titled it, "What Comes After?" Because that was the part they never understood. I didn't build the project for applause. I built it because people needed it. And people still did. And now, no one could take that from me again. The email arrived at 6:42 a.m. on a Sunday. Subject line, "Follow-up Joint Account Inquiry." I opened it without thinking, expecting it to be related to the school grant I was managing. But it wasn't. It was from the bank. A flagged alert tied to an old internal account, the one we used during the early days of the Community Growth Initiative. The one that had been opened in my name before Meredith's return, when everything was still held together by sticky notes and trust. I hadn't touched that account in over a year. It had been dormant, or so I believed. But now it had activity. A failed wire transfer. An attempt to access a loan extension, denied due to missing authorization. The transaction had been processed using my old credentials, except one digit was off. Close, but not mine. Forged. I called the bank. Gave them the case number. The rep on the line sounded hesitant, then professional. It appears, she said carefully, that someone tried to reactivate a corporate line under your profile. There were discrepancies in the documentation, so it was escalated. The digital signature didn't match previous authorization patterns. I didn't ask who. I already knew. Meredith, or someone acting under her authority, had tried to breathe life back into something dead and use my name to do it. Again. I thanked the rep, requested the incident report, and forwarded it straight to Ethan. His reply came fast. This qualifies as attempted identity fraud. Again. Then a second line. We file this one. I stared at the screen not with shock but with a strange sense of clarity. They hadn't learned, or maybe they had but only learned to be more careful. Quiet manipulation was in their blood. I had just been the first one to make it inconvenient. That afternoon I got a call from my old landlord, the one who owned the apartment above Mom's garage. Hey, just a heads up, he said. Your mother asked if she could forward some of your old mail here. Said you might have left tax documents behind. I hadn't. Everything I owned had been removed. Every file, every receipt, even the thumb drives. I told him no. He hesitated, then added, She seemed scattered. I thanked him, hung up, and sat still. The next day I walked past the mural again. The spray paint had faded slightly in the rain. Ours was still visible, just less sharp. Someone had started to scrub it but never finished. It looked like a wound half healed and then left to fester. Back at home, I pulled out the original project folder, the one I'd kept separate, untouched. Inside was everything, the logo drafts, the launch photos, the handwritten agenda from our very first vendor meeting. I laid each piece out on the table. Then I opened my laptop, scanned them all, and created a backup folder named Roots. Not for revenge, for record. 3 days later, Meredith emailed again. I didn't know they used your name. I had nothing to do with it. You have to believe me. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Her pattern was too familiar. Claim ignorance, beg forgiveness, sidestep consequence. But silence isn't an absence of reply. Sometimes it's a verdict. That night, I walked by the school early. Lights were on. The janitor waved. I waved back. Inside, on the wall just beside the workshop room, one of the students had pinned a quote. Handwritten, uneven letters. You don't need permission to rebuild. Just courage. No attribution, no fancy design. Just words that landed like truth. I stayed there for a long time. Not thinking, just breathing. Just remembering that every structure I'd ever been part of had crumbled the moment I left, not because I cursed it, but because I was the one who kept it steady. They could keep trying to revive what they'd ruined, but they'd always be chasing a version of the story that no longer existed. And I was done being their invisible architect. I made coffee slowly. For the first time in years, I didn't check my bank app while it brewed. No calendar alerts flashing at the top of my screen. No unread emails stacked like little red accusations. Just morning, just light. Just the quiet weight of a clean, ordinary day. I watered the herbs on my windowsill. The mint had started to bloom, small and steady. The basil needed pruning. I moved through the apartment barefoot, the floor cold but grounding. The desk near the window still held my folders, the Roots archive, the new proposals for the school initiative. Nothing dramatic, nothing grand. Just pages with plans that only needed one thing to matter, follow through. That afternoon, I repainted the back wall of the workshop room. The kids had picked the color forest green. I bought the paint myself. We pushed the tables aside, opened the windows, played music from someone's phone speaker. It smelled like newness, like space, like something you could finally call yours without flinching. Later, when I got home, there was a letter in the mail. No envelope, just folded once, name written by hand. Inside was a wedding invitation. Meredith's. I hadn't known she was engaged. No note, no greeting. Just my name printed on the envelope and a time, a place, a dress code. I turned it over once. The paper was thick, the font elegant. The kind of invitation meant to be seen, even in silence. I placed it on the counter and let it sit there for a while. Then I folded it again and dropped it into the recycling bin. I didn't hesitate. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't even frown. It was paper. It had weight, but not meaning. That night, I lit a candle. Not for grief, not for memory, just for stillness. A small act. A quiet ritual. The kind you do not for closure, but for clarity. And I sat. Not angry, not vindicated, just clear. They would go on rewriting, reframing. Pretending the fire hadn't started in their hands. They would host dinners, give speeches, send out invites with perfect calligraphy, but they would never be able to trace back what they lost. Not really. Because what they tried to erase was never stored on paper. It lived in the choices I made long before their recognition mattered. I didn't walk away to hurt them. I walked away to find peace, and I stayed there,